If you wanna stay with me, if
All right. Welcome to your personalized deep dive. You ready to go?
Absolutely. Always ready to dive deep.
Awesome. So today we're tackling a topic you've specifically requested, and it's one that hits close to home for so many people. Depression. You sent over that podcast, Breaking the Silence, right?
Yep, that's the one.
Okay, cool. And I got to say, listening to it, it really struck me just how much more there is to depression than just feeling sad. You know, it's like it's a whole other beast.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what they hit on right from the get-go. Depression, it's not just a case of the blues. It's a serious mood disorder, and it can really mess with every single part of your life. Like, think about it, your relationships, work, hobbies, even your physical health.
It's like it just kind of casts this shadow over everything, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that whole feeling of just like utter hopelessness, that's what really got to me.
Yeah.
Imagine waking up day after day and feeling totally drained, like completely zapped of energy. And the things you used to love, the things that brought you joy, they don't even spark a flicker of interest anymore. And that's the reality for millions upon millions around the world.
It's a heavy thought. And actually, the World Health Organization considers depression one of the leading causes of disability globally.
Yeah, it's a big one, and it makes you realize like this isn't just some small isolated thing. It's a global issue.
And Breaking the Silence, they do a great job of digging into like the root causes of this thing, right? And they kind of break it down like a detective would, into these three main categories: biological, psychological, and environmental.
Yeah, they lay it out really well. They talk about how our brain chemistry, hormones, even our genes, they all play a part.
So, like, could you actually be like predisposed to depression?
It's an interesting question. They haven't found like a single depression gene or anything like that, but research does suggest that family history can, definitely increase your risk. So, for example, if your parent or a sibling has had struggles with depression, it could mean that you might be more susceptible to it as well.
It's almost like you inherit a vulnerability in a way.
Yeah, that's one way to think about it, but it's important to remember it's not a guarantee.
Right, right. Okay, so there's that biological piece, but it's not just about our biology, is it?
No, definitely not. Our thoughts, our experiences, the things we go through, that stuff plays a huge role too. And the podcast really, really drove that point home.
It's like it all ties together, Nature and nurture, they both have their say.
Exactly. Past trauma, emotional baggage that we haven't dealt with, even just chronic ongoing stress, those can all build up and contribute to depression taking hold. It's almost like you're carrying around this invisible weight on your shoulders day in and day out.
Yeah, and then you layer on top of that the whole impact of our environment, right? Which is something we don't always think about.
Absolutely. It's those big life changes, the curveballs that knock us off our feet. Job loss, financial problems, maybe a loved one passes away, or even just a really, really tough breakup. Those external stressors, they can make us so much more vulnerable to depression, especially if we're already, struggling with some of those other factors.
So it's like a perfect storm almost.
Yeah.
But, something that really struck me is how much they emphasized in the podcast that depression, it's not like this one-size-fits-all kind of thing. It shows up differently in different people.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's a chameleon. You can't just say, okay, if you have these three symptoms, then you have depression. It manifests in so many different ways.
I guess that's what makes it so hard to spot sometimes, right?
Exact. One person might, withdraw completely, become totally isolated from their friends and family, while another person might get super irritable and agitated, snapping at everyone around them. And then, there are those physical symptoms like constant fatigue, changes in appetite, sleep problems, even just unexplained aches and pains all over.
It's really sneaky the way it can disguise itself, I guess. But, I mean, there are some common red flags, some, like, warning signs to watch out for, right?
Right. Like, if someone's constantly feeling overwhelmed with sadness or hopelessness, if they've lost interest in things they used to love, having trouble focusing, concentrating, or even, and this is the scary one, if they start having thoughts of hurting themselves.
Yeah, that's a whole other level. It's heartbreaking to even think about someone going through that and feeling like they have nowhere to turn.
And that's why it's just so crucial to be able to recognize these signs. Like if you see these things in yourself or in someone you care about, reaching out, getting help, that's the most important thing because depression, it is treatable. There is hope.
And that's a really important message from the podcast. Like, They really drove that point home. It's not a life sentence.
Right. And they talked about how important it is to have this kind of multi-pronged approach, right? It's
Right.
not just about popping a pill and calling it a day.
Yeah.
It's about, really exploring different options and finding what works best for each individual.
So, like, what kind of options are we talking about here?
Well, for some folks, therapy can be really effective. Like, have you ever heard of cognitive behavioral therapy?
CBT.
Yep, that's the one. CBT, basically, it helps you identify and change those negative thought patterns that are, like, feeding the depression.
So, like rewiring your brain almost.
Kind of. It's like, imagine you have this toolbox, right? And it's filled with all these techniques to, like, challenge those negative thoughts and replace them with ones that are more, positive and realistic.
Okay, so there's therapy, but then what about medication, like antidepressants, things like that?
Yeah, medication can definitely have its place. It can help with regulating brain chemistry, but, and this is key, it's not a cure-all.
It's not like a magic pill that just makes everything go away.
Exactly. It's one piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole picture. And, something that's equally important are those lifestyle changes, things that empower you to really take control of your well-being. The podcast, they talked about exercise, getting regular physical activity.
Yeah, like endorphins and all that.
Exactly. And a balanced diet, getting enough sleep. These might seem like small, simple things, but honestly, they can make a huge difference.
Like, it's like building a solid foundation, right? Setting yourself up for success.
Exactly. And, they also made a big point of emphasizing social connection, like reaching out to friends, to family, maybe even joining a support group. Those things can give you that sense of belonging and understanding that's so, so important when you're struggling with depression.
It's that reminder that you're not alone, like there are other people who get it.
Absolutely. We're social creatures. We're not meant to go through things alone. And having that strong support system can really be a lifeline.
Totally. And speaking of lifelines, they also talked about mindfulness and self-care practices, right? Like finding those little things that help you recharge and de-stress.
Yeah, things like meditation, journaling, taking some time for yourself each day, even if it's just for a few minutes, to reconnect with like your inner peace.
It's all about finding those little pockets of calm amidst the chaos. And, one of the most powerful things they said was about breaking the stigma around mental health.
Oh, yeah.
Like they posed this really thought-provoking question. They said, would you ever feel ashamed to seek help for a broken leg?
No way.
Right. So why should it be any different for a mental health condition like depression?
Right. It makes no sense.
Seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness. And it's something we need to keep talking about so we can create a more compassionate and understanding society for everyone, right?
Absolutely. And, this actually brings up a really interesting question that I was thinking about while listening to the podcast. They focused a lot on the individual, right? Like what we can do as individuals to manage depression.
Yeah.
But what about like societal changes? Could addressing things like poverty, inequality, lack of access to healthcare, could those things actually contribute to reducing depression rates overall?
That's such a good point. Like how much of this is about individual responsibility and how much is about the systems we live in?
Exactly.
It's a really complex issue, and it's not an easy one to answer, but it's definitely a conversation worth having.
Totally.
So listeners, we've covered a lot of ground today, but this deep dive is really just the beginning, right? There's always more to learn. If you're interested in exploring this further, you could look into the different types of depression, different treatment options, the latest research. But the biggest takeaway, the most important thing to remember, is that you're not alone in this. There are resources out there, and there is hope.
Absolutely.